In 1980, 6% of British adults were obese. By 2020, 28%. The difference wasn't willpower, it wasn't laziness. Walk into a 1980s household at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday evening and you'd see something that barely exists today. A mother at the stove, 3 pots boiling, oven timer counting down, entire family eating the same meal prepared from scratch within the hour. The truth about why Britons stayed slim has nothing to do with what diet culture tells you. The numbers don't lie. The National Heights and Weights Survey measured British adults. 6% of men were obese, 9% of women. Those numbers seemed concerning at the time. By 1993, obesity had doubled, 13% of men, 16% of women. By 2019, 27% of men and 29% of women. In just under 40 years, obesity rates had quadrupled. The Health Survey for England tracks the progression. 1993 to 2001 saw the sharpest rise. The rate slowed after 2001 but never stopped climbing. Mean body mass index increased from 25.8 in 1993 to 27.6 in 2019. Every region saw increases. The Northeast hit 34% of obesity by 2019. London stayed lowest at 23%, but even that represented a massive jump from 1980s baselines. Child obesity followed similar patterns. In 2023, 22% of Year 6 children were obese, compared to negligible rates in the early 1980s. The gradient correlated strongly with deprivation. Obesity in the most deprived areas ran double the rates in the least deprived. The question isn't whether Britons got heavier, the question is why it happened so fast. The walking collapse. People walked less, much less. In 2011, 10.9% of commuters walked to work. In 1971, that figure was significantly higher. Between those decades, car ownership exploded. In 1980, many households owned no car. By 2020, multiple car households became standard. The average Briton in 2022 made 862 trips per year, compared to 1,074 in 2000, a 20% decline. Walking trips fell hardest. People aged 17 to 29 walked 197 trips in 2022 versus 233 in 2012. Even short journeys under 2 miles increasingly happened by car. Physical activity through active transport, walking, cycling, declined steadily from the 1980s onward. Fewer steps meant fewer calories burned. The mathematics was brutal: same calorie intake, reduced movement, inevitable weight gain.
The food environment revolution. Walking wasn't the only difference. What Britons ate mattered just as much as how they moved. The 1970s marked the beginning. Supermarkets started their dominance of the food industry, replacing corner shops and local grocers where people bought ingredients for meals they'd cook that evening. The frozen food aisle expanded. Ready meals appeared. By the 1980s, microwaves became household standard, and the food industry responded by creating products designed for speed rather than nutrition. Walk into a 1980s supermarket and you'd see maybe 8,000 product lines. Walk into a 2020s Tesco and you'd see 40,000. That expansion wasn't just variety, it represented a fundamental shift in what food meant. In the 1980s, food was still primarily ingredients: potatoes, carrots, meat cuts, flour, eggs, things you assembled into meals. By the 2000s, food was increasingly products, packaged, processed, ready to consume. The data shows the transformation clearly. In 1980, the average meal took 1 hour to prepare. By 1999, 20 minutes. That collapse didn't happen because people got better at cooking. It happened because they stopped cooking from scratch. The food industry stepped into that gap with processed alternatives that saved time but delivered calories in entirely different forms. Snacking exploded. In the 1980s, 3 meals a day remained standard. By the 2000s, continuous grazing became normal. Crisps, chocolate, sugary drinks, consumption patterns that barely existed 40 years earlier became default behaviour, not because Britons suddenly developed worse willpower, but because the food environment made those choices effortless and ubiquitous. The rise of eating outside the home accelerated everything. Takeaways, fast food chains, restaurant meals all increased dramatically from the 1980s through the 2000s, bringing portion sizes and calorie densities that home cooking rarely matched.
The death of home cooking. A 1980s British household at dinner time looked different from today. The kitchen smelled of roasting meat, boiling vegetables, gravy thickening on the stove. A mother, usually the mother, social norms hadn't shifted yet, stood at the cooker, apron on, timing 3 separate pots while the oven timer counted down. This happened 6 nights a week, sometimes 7. Father arrived home at 5:30. Dinner was on the table by 6. Everyone ate the same meal, prepared from scratch, using ingredients purchased that day or the day before. That pattern was so standard it went unremarked. Of course you cooked dinner. What else would you do? The 1980s saw increasing numbers of women entering the workforce, which changed everything about meal preparation. Time became the constraint. By the 1990s, ready meals filled the gap. Chicken tikka masala, declared Britain's national dish in 2001, was rarely made from scratch. It came in plastic containers from Marks & Spencer. Pasta replaced meat and 2 veg because it cooked in 12 minutes instead of 60. Breakfast became a casualty of speeded-up lifestyles. Traditional cooked breakfasts disappeared except on weekends. Cereal bars replaced porridge, despite containing sugar levels that would have shocked 1980s parents. School meals declined after local authorities stopped being required to provide them in the late 1970s. By the 1980s and 1990s, packed lunches often meant pre-packaged items rather than sandwiches made that morning. The microwave fundamentally altered what counted as cooking. Making dinner could now mean piercing film and pressing buttons. The skills passed from mothers to daughters for generations, how to make gravy, how to roast properly, how to time multiple dishes, started disappearing because they weren't needed anymore. What died wasn't just home cooking, it was the entire culture of food as something you made rather than something you bought ready-made.
Portion size explosion. Portion sizes grew alongside processed food availability. A 1980s dinner plate measured 9 inches in diameter. By the 2000s, 11 or 12 inches became standard. That difference sounds minor, but represents a massive increase in surface area, 30 to 40% more space to fill. Restaurant portions followed similar expansion. What counted as a single serving in 1980 would be considered a child's portion by 2020 standards. The food industry encouraged this deliberately. Larger portions created perceived value. Consumers felt they got more for their money. Fast food chains competed on size. Supersizing became a marketing strategy in the 1990s, normalizing consumption of meals that would have fed 2 people in the 1980s. Packaged foods followed suit. Chocolate bars grew, crisp packets expanded, soft drink bottles went from standard 330ml cans to 500ml bottles as the default single-serving size. Research showed most people consumed what they were served regardless of hunger. The container size determined intake rather than satiety signals. The calorie difference added up quietly. An extra 100 calories per meal, barely noticeable in the moment, meant 700 extra calories per week, 3,000 per month, enough to gain significant weight over a year, compounding over decades. Portion size wasn't about greed, it was about environmental cues that changed without anyone noticing. The sugar deluge. Portion sizes were bad, sugar content was worse. In the 1980s, bottled water consumption was negligible. By the 2000s, Britons drank 12 times as much bottled water as they had in the 1980s. But they also drank vastly more sugary soft drinks. Fruit juice, marketed as healthy, became standard despite containing sugar levels comparable to fizzy drinks. Processed foods hid sugar everywhere. Bread contained added sugar, pasta sauces, salad dressings, ready meals. Foods that in the 1980s contained minimal sugar were reformulated with sweetness to improve palatability and shelf life. The average Briton consumed far more sugar in 2020 than in 1980, but much of it came from sources they didn't recognize as sugar. The food industry learned that adding sugar increased consumption, which increased sales, which incentivized adding more sugar. The real surprise. So what's the truth that will surprise you? It's not that 1980s Britons had better discipline. It's not that they tried harder or cared more about health. The surprise is that staying slim required almost no effort because the environment did the work for them. They walked because cars weren't ubiquitous and parking was difficult. They cooked because ready meals barely existed and takeaways were occasional treats, not daily options. They ate smaller portions because plates were smaller and restaurant servings hadn't expanded yet. They consumed less sugar because it wasn't hidden in everything. The 1980s Britain didn't make virtuous choices, they made normal choices in an environment that happened to support healthy weight. The 2020s Britain makes normal choices in an environment engineered to encourage overconsumption. Obesity isn't a personal failing, it's a predictable response to environmental change. The food industry, car dependency, processed food ubiquity, disappearing home cooking, expanded portions, hidden sugars, these transformed Britain in 40 years. The question isn't why people got heavier, the question is how anyone stays slim when everything around them changed to make weight gain the path of least resistance.